Hi everybody, I'm Garrett Macdonald, and my main focus right now is the Energy Web Foundation, where we're building an open source infrastructure in the form of a Ethereum-based blockchain for all energy transactions around the world. It's a proof of authority network. We just open sourced it on the 1st of this month, yeah, I think most of you were here for the talk yesterday, so you kind of have a brief overview of it, but that's the perspective I'm going to bring to this panel.
Yeah, for sure. I will explore what Proffer is later as well. So yeah, seeing that we have an interesting train, I'll start off with Garrett. Energy grids and managing smart energy is an interesting topic. I used to be at the Smart Cities group at MIT's Media Lab, and it's a sexy thing these days with Tesla getting into it in some ways and things of that nature. And so I want to know, as does the audience, how does energy and energy grids, smart energy, get benefited by a blockchain? Like, what aspects of the distributed ledger are you guys using to the fullest? So yeah.
So one of the big things, that's a great question, and obviously, yeah, you have some experience from the MIT Media Lab, which is a wonderful organization that's doing a lot of cool stuff in energy. Check it out if you haven't already. It's basically some of the main advantages of using a blockchain-based system is we can give an identity to every single device on a network. So every single node can have an identity, and we can trace all the records of all the energy transactions back to them. Another thing that an identity allows for is automated settlements. So every device can actually hold value and transact value autonomously. So this allows entirely new market designs and market motivations for every single device. So this means each device is incentivized to act in its own best interest. Instead of there being kind of like an overseeing energy company, all the devices can actually cooperate independently of any kind of like larger organization. So it's actually it's going to be a huge revolution in the way energy works once all of these devices are equipped with their own identities.
Okay, that's really interesting. And this incentivization process, basically, like, as a device on this smart grid, how do I behave? What are my incentives? Have you guys designed the blockchain to be opinionated, where there is something of like, hey, I want the best for me, and that's like a specific metric, or is it very open-ended and guys can just
yeah, so basically we're just building the infrastructure level, and in an application level, basically it's like, I like to look at blockchain infrastructure in like 3 levels, like application, protocol, which is kind of the interface, and then infrastructure. We're just building the infrastructure. So anybody's welcome to build their own protocol and application layers on top of that. So it's completely unbiased, of course. But yeah, it just turns out when you apply renewables to a situation that say that we're talking about the application layer, each node is going to be incentivized to use the most locally generated electricity because the transmission costs are lower, so the overall costs will be lower, and that's ultimately environmentally beneficial at the same time as being monetarily beneficial.
Exactly, it's both 2 in 1, which is exciting, and I think it actually lays a really good foundation, because infrastructure, this industry in general and blockchain right now, infrastructure is the core, and it seems like the best and greatest projects out there are focusing on the infrastructure level. And going from infrastructure, on top of that, we're building protocols like Proffer. On top of that, you have use cases such as what Shadowfax is working on. Then you get to more higher level organizations. So one is investors and one is government. So we have a panel that kind of covers it all. So at the top of that food chain, Arpit, I guess, so the one investment you made, it's probably given you a very good in-depth insight into what's happening here, both in terms of different kind of investing and also what kinds of use cases people are building on. So our hackathon here is not focused on the investing revolutions that are happening, but rather on, what gets you excited. And I know that in India especially, the investment market towards crypto projects is pretty early. Like, a lot of the other hedge funds or venture capital firms here are kind of just easing into it. So what made you kind of jump in? What do you feel like are the best use cases out there? Do you also feel that infrastructure is what we should invest in only, or are you going to spread the wealth more evenly?
When you say infrastructure, what do you mean?
Infrastructure as in, so right now there's a split of like basically blockchains, and that would be infrastructure level. and their scalability projects. So people are looking at this different way, like storage, identity, governance.
Okay. So honestly, the only one investment that we have made is a company called UnoCoin, which is a Bitcoin company. Yes, it uses blockchain in the background, but that is not a blockchain company really. They have consulting projects in blockchain and they're experimenting with some of those. So to be very honest, our investment is not onto blockchain. It is primarily as a Bitcoin.
I see.
And the thesis of Bitcoin is kind of very straightforward, that Bitcoin seems like what cash would be if it was to born after internet was born, what money would be after if there was internet already available. So that is a fundamentally different way of looking at things. At the same time, there are experiments, and I'm aware of experiments around blockchain. Unfortunately, our job as investors is to only look at things after they have found some feet.
Of course.
Right? And a lot of the concepts that I talk about or I read about, what people talk about and I read, I honestly haven't built it myself, seem they are fairly up in the air.
Yeah.
Right? And I haven't seen things happening because what we can invest in are things which people can transact with.
Yeah.
Right? There is some revenue, there is some process, there is service available, and we haven't seen much of that happening, unfortunately, in India.
Yeah.
There have been so many cases. I know, not even Silicon Valley, London and Europe have had many very interesting, exciting blockchain startups. It's a challenge to all of you. We haven't seen too many of those in India.
Yeah.
Right? And we would love to see them. There is no reason to not invest into companies which are building on top of a blockchain. I don't know if I will ever invest, or at least in near future, will invest into a new infra company, like an Ethereum company, because probably we are not equipped to know as to what will it take to build that kind of a business. However, applications are on blockchain which have business benefit, by all means.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's very
Sinchan, can I add on to what Arpit was saying? I think we also have to look at it from who are the users' point of view. And I think the split of infrastructure, it's not just arbitrarily added by investors because it sounds cooler. I think what ultimately drives maybe an interest in infrastructure or more infrastructure projects today is, are the end users really there? Because even if you think about all the protocols building on top of Ethereum for consumer applications. So earlier today we were having sessions talking about end user applications, whether it's peer-to-peer education with incentives or other things. In the early stages, like all of you in this crowd, how many people are using Bitcoin and Ethereum to transact on an app other than for money exchange? Raise your hand. For anything other than money exchange. Exactly. And that's the point. So even in this crowd is very representative of the rest of the world as well in that sense. People aren't using Bitcoin, Ethereum to transact outside of just finance. And in the near term, the exciting investments that we've seen, I think, from hedge funds, and in the US, a lot of investors like Sequoia, Andreessen Horowitz, they've started investing in tokens, but for projects that have an immediate crypto use case, where it's where the other users are maybe other blockchain projects. And I think, Sinchan, what you were describing with the scalability projects, that's a perfect example of that.
Yeah, so obviously, when I said that we don't invest into, we haven't seen things happening, I'm counting ICO out of it, right? So a whole bunch of tokens that are being offered and people have invested in them, and there are hundreds of millions of dollars have been invested that we are counting out of, right?
Yeah, it seems like those projects are even staying away from traditional investment strategies, so a different game altogether. Yeah, and so then I would go to Amit actually. So, this kind of goes. So yesterday we had Ajay from Axel Partners, another investment firm, and it was interesting to hear a similar perspective where it's like, hey, we want to think about what can blockchain do. Like AI is kind of coming to fruition now, and a lot of startups are coming out with actual use cases. With blockchain getting there one day, what can we do? And he had suggested a lot of government-focused opportunities with Aadhaar and things of that nature. As someone who works with startups, with state governments, what do you see as like as an opportunity there? Like what kinds of ways do you think, and we kind of talked about this yesterday, of how do you excite a state government? How do you get them to see those use cases and plan for that in the future? Because, 3 years from now, if blockchain is all prime and ready and there's a bunch of use cases and actual products out there, it might be like a little late for a government to respond and start creating regulation at that point. So what do you think are some good strategies? Maybe you've come up with some since yesterday.
Right. So what I think is state level, and I will probably quote a lot. So we work with a lot of eastern states, a lot of northeastern states. There, the basic premises in terms of technology is not available, right? So even if we talk about blockchain, and that this was exactly what I was quoting yesterday, what we are trying to do there is we are trying to tell them how to learn alphabets, right? And blockchain for them will be possibly a PhD book. So there has to be, blockchain is something I believe it is future for a lot of things, especially around government, because in terms of identity, right, supply chain, counterfeit, there's a lot of things which can be done, but I think it will take its own sweet time. The good part is there are agencies like Niti Aayog which are taking their steps ahead. So, and when the state governments look at these things, they will probably be more receptive to all these things. But the word of caution for me is I think you need to, when you go to state governments, you need to have a big proof of concept rather than just creating a website, right? Yeah. Or a product or an app doesn't work there, because whatever the government does impacts lakhs of people, right? Even if it's at a state level, and if it's a national level, we are talking about crores of people. So you possibly need to look at how that is going to impact, because the training, right, and implementation also will take its own sweet time. So that's where I think a lot of people, especially when we are trying to create these cooler apps, we forget that the real user is somebody who is out there in a small village, would still need to understand what is Aadhaar, right? He got Aadhaar because somebody forced him to use that Aadhaar. Otherwise, he doesn't get it benefits. But what else can be done above Aadhaar is something which is still being, I think, underplayed.
Exactly. Yeah. No, 100%. Yeah, in my travels in the Northeast, it's always been interesting where it's paradise, and mainly because it's been untouched by society in a lot of ways. There's a lot of tribal territories, and it's a very interesting challenge, and I hope like someone at the hackathon will be able to take it on in some way, where how do you come up with something that not only tackles the technology side of things, but even gives us a glimpse towards the user experience part of it, where once someone looks at it, they understand what it is, what it's for, and that could be the state government or even a villager somewhere. And especially these states in the Northeast, I think if we could come up with some way to explain it to them and get them excited about it, you could have one of those leaps we were talking about yesterday where, you know, a lot of these guys don't have the basic infrastructure, and if we can build basic infrastructure on a more advanced platform like blockchain, then there's something exciting about that.
So just to add in here, I think apart from the infrastructure, this blockchain to percolate into maybe rural India, that will be more challenging in a sense, because see, blockchain inherently is a mimic of trust. You are trying to show that yes, instead of the government, you can trust this mechanism, and all your information, identity, energy sources will remain intact, and nobody can tamper proof with them. We people who understand the crypto mathematics can appreciate that yes, I can trust that sort of a thing. But to teach the same sort of a thing to a rural guy and make him feel that yes, this is more trustable even than his government, that is a really big challenge that we need to crack it out.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Anshul, would you like to add on?
I think that's a very good point, and I also see that as an opportunity, not just as a challenge. We touched on this topic slightly. I think for blockchain to take off, we will have to give users a way to feel that this solution is usable, in terms of both how long it takes for transactions to settle using a blockchain ledger, as well as usable from a UI perspective, where they don't have to know that it's using the blockchain. So I see what you described as, you know, if there's a use case where the blockchain can provide a benefit, it's on the developer of the application and the protocol to hide that complexity from that end user. And I think with rural India, there will be even bigger challenges perhaps with connectivity, which you still need even on the blockchain. But regarding trust, I see that, like establishing trust for the user, I see that as an exciting opportunity that can be addressed with UI, UX to some extent.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually. Like when people do talk about UI, UX in this industry, it's mostly that, hey, like if I want to do a Bitcoin transaction or anything of that sort, I need to open up a hardware wallet or a software wallet which stores my cryptocurrency tokens. I have to unlock it. I have to use my private key to sign a transaction. It's pretty complicated. And if I try to get my dad to basically put money into an ICO, for example, it is very hard. And this concept of trust actually is something that kind of people do skip out on. And it's something very important where even there's some people in New York who are asking me about this, and they know for the most part what a blockchain is, and they're like, still, but how can I trust it? And you know, it's true. The trust someone like a cryptographer has of mathematics is not the same as a normal individual. That is a fascinating challenge in its own. So yeah, interesting. I would say, Vaibhav, let's go to you. I think we've heard supply chain a bunch of times in this summit hackathon, and you mentioned a couple of very practical pieces of it. It'd be amazing, especially because a lot of these guys are trying to build their own practical use cases of it. If you could take us through one of those flows, as in like, hey, this is what happens and this piece actually gets written onto a blockchain, I think that would be really enlightening, because yeah, I think otherwise it's hard to visualize sometimes.
So I'll take 2 examples. One of it was also shared yesterday, and so that is really common. So as SMEs or there's the logistics generally or the supply chain, they are, I mean, logistics is actually the last mile of getting a particular work done, and the supply chain is sort of a middle sort of a bench here. So the working capital issues, they are a very prominent part of a logistics company, because you will only get paid once the entire thing has been delivered. And a lot of people, they raise up funds for working capital loans as working capital loans. Now something of this sort can actually be aided with help of blockchain. So for example, we as companies, we are unlisted companies, we are SMEs. When we go into the banks, they ask us, okay, dude, give us your 3-year annual return and lots of documents, so that I can trust you that you will be able to repay the loan. And we are like, dude, we are 2.5 years old only. So how can we get those documents to you? And we eventually get that at a very high interest rate. Now, if the entire transactions that I have supplied this item, I have done this work for Macdonald's, I have done this work for Flipkart, gets recorded on the blockchain, and that can be verified very easily by the banking organization or by any other organization which is willing to take the risk of giving me a loan, then that is a very major improvement in the status quo out there. So the workflow in which how things will flow is all my transactions, they get recorded on the blockchain, they get verified by my stakeholders, and this information using the token can be verified by the banks, that whether this transaction has been done, how much amount has been picked up, how much amount has been delivered. Same goes for the supply chain industry out there. So the financing part in it can actually ease out in a lot better way. Second word I would say, see, logistics or supply chain, traditionally if you see it in a very crude manner, it's a business of handshakes. Right, there are so many stakeholders out there. What you need to do is to record each and every handshake onto your system. Because if you just see that if an item is lost, to trace back at what stage was it lost or was it damaged, it's a very big challenge currently in the entire pipeline. And it's what I would say a traditional approach for a blockchain, that each and every transaction can be put in there, can be verified by the stakeholders. All the handshakes, they can be verified in here, and nobody can go and change the information in a prior date. So that sort of a thing will ensure that if the current state of an item is out for delivery, then it is actually out for delivery, and nobody can go in the back date and try to change that information. So these are some, having said that, these are like simple, very simple on the face of it, that yes, this is something blockchain can definitely do for us. And but very intelligent mechanisms can also be built on top of it. And something on the lines that I've been reading, so not related to what I would say logistics directly, but related to blue collar workforce. So one of the major thing, and maybe can be really helpful in the government sector as well, The major problem in recruiting a blue collar workforce is that you need to have a background verification. You need to have a sense of trust of that person that yes, I can, let's say, hire this delivery boy and it will go to the customer and would behave normally and appropriately. Currently there is no repository, a central repository. Every company does their own set of verification. Now if this identity and the behavior of the blue collar people can be linked on the blockchain, anybody can go in and verify the true nature of that person, and that can actually help us in easy hiring or easy onboarding of the blue collar people, be it in the factories, be it in the logistics part, be it in the supply chain part. So that is something I would also say a good use case of blockchain.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, go ahead.
What you highlighted, can you guys hear me? Hello. Yeah. So Vaibhav, what you highlighted just now, I think it's a really big use case, even from a fraud prevention point of view. In India and China, those are two countries that one I know personally, and the other I've read about, that have large certificate factories or diploma factories where you can pay people to get diplomas generated. I think this might be an even larger problem in the East Asian context from what I've read. It's been covered on the various crypto blogs focusing on that part. It's exciting to see that what you just described is starting to happen. And so MIT, our alma mater, has just now announced that they are offering diplomas as a pilot program on the blockchain, or verifying diplomas on the blockchain. And of course it will require adoption from a number of stakeholders before something like this can take off. But the exciting part is when it comes to a use case like this, the blockchain implementation is rather simple, and there's a lot of a human onboarding that needs to happen, getting stakeholders on board. And with that onboarding, this could be a really immediate use case of blockchain.
Yeah. I'll probably want to add another layer to it, rather than blue collar, right? Than in the normal. So I've worked with Naukri for a good amount of time. One of the challenges which a recruitment firm faces when they are hiring for a big firm is they're using the same Naukri database or a LinkedIn subscription. And when I'm, let's say, sending a resume to him, right? As an HR head, to save money, he'll say, okay, I have already got this resume, right, from somewhere. So this could be an interesting use case where whatever database is being pulled up, right? It's there on blockchain, and if he is questioning my resume, my candidate, that will be an interesting tool. And trust me, I think there will be people who will be ready to pay, especially the recruitment firms, which loses a lot of business because of this huge challenge.
That's good to know. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah. I think someone should.
I have a question. I don't know whether it always makes sense, all of you guys. The cases that you described, like Aadhaar or identity or a resume database or certificate database, much of that exists in a non-blockchain, in the non-blockchain world. I honestly don't understand this fully, maybe. But if there is no problem with the existing system, why would you reinvent the wheel?
So I would like to take it first. So with respect to the blue collar people, for example, I would say there is no such solution that is existing. So I mean, we have LinkedIn, we have other resources for the white collar jobs where people post in and it's public. Anybody can see and anybody can actually say that yes, this is reported an issue. Something of this sort does not exist in the blue collar domain, and almost everybody pays these third party people or the police verification guys to do that. Having said that, yes, a short answer would be yes, the existing technologies can also solve this problem.
Fair point.
A common database built, which is shareable, GET APIs are there for everybody to access, and no POST APIs are open, for example.
So Vaibhav, so I completely understand. What you saying is perfect, right? The question I want to ask, and maybe you guys are experts. What is it that having, so if I understand blockchain at its core, is a distributed identity system where there is no centralized authority. It says this is yes, or this is, this holder is a silver holder or gray holder or not a red holder. It's someone who's saying this, and most of those things exist. Where are those things which it is impossible to do it in a centralized environment?
Yep. So one thing that you missed in this, I would like to add in here, that it is immutable. Sure. you cannot mutate this blockchain. If you have to do it, you have to do it to the entire part of it. And that is the entire thing. So let's say if we create a common database of X employees and all, and we share it to everybody, the basic question comes, can I trust this database? Sure. Right? And this sense of trust is what blockchain is giving me. That whatever data is in there, it cannot be mutated. Sure. This trust in the current scenario can also be given by the government, yes, or maybe given by platforms like Naukri.com. Yep. They can also ensure this sort of trust. Now, I mean, then people can question that, yes, can I trust Google, for example? Can Possibly. I trust government, for example?
Possibly.
Right. And that is where blockchain says that, yes, you can trust mathematics, and if you trust mathematics, you can trust me.
So, to that extent, sure, okay, understand. I'm actually curious to understand, and I probably don't understand this very well. Are there use cases which necessarily need a distributed trust and cannot be solved by centralized trust today?
Yeah,
because I haven't come across those.
Yeah, I can go deeper into that, and I think it actually depends on what blockchain you use. So for example, what you can do on Bitcoin versus what on Ethereum. So one example will go specifically because you mentioned in the Aadhaar. So a lot of the conversations we had yesterday with Niti Aayog and what we've been having over the past while. What's interesting about the ideas there is that, hey, you do have Aadhaar, you have India Stack already. And the question becomes, of course, you can always attempt to do the similar thing with a centralized system. It's just that the pros and cons vary. And so with India Stack, for example, a lot of the APIs there, they're pretty closed right now. As a startup, unless you have good connections, it's very hard for you to get access to them. And so specifically UPI is out right now. They're building other stuff like EHR and things of that nature. And two questions come about. So one with Aadhaar has already come about where a lot of state governments have been saying that, hey, I want access to that data. I want those fingerprints because I want to catch a criminal. And these huge privacy issues come about where for Google, sure, I'll trust them. They have like massive procedures set up and they don't really mess up a lot. But for the government, I could see a situation where my fingerprints are accessed through a state government without my...
So it comes down to the fact that you may trust Google and not Indian government, or whichever way you choose it to be.
Yeah,
right?
or basically developers, right? So right now the Indian government, India Stack, iSpirit, these guys aren't necessarily able to say that, hey, everyone get access to this data, because it's hard, right? You're not sure who is using that data in what ways. Sure. So that's where blockchain, specifically the Ethereum blockchain, gets interesting because...
So in the cases where there's trust established, whether it's Google or Apple or Microsoft or Facebook or Indian government or US government or anything else, anyone else, there is no need for blockchain?
No, so there, the interesting use case, specifically in the Ethereum blockchain, is that, so earlier today I was describing that, people write code collaboratively on GitHub. But what's interesting about Ethereum that it allows us to run code collaboratively. And what that means is that, so Google, when it's writing software and it's created a platform, let's say Google Cloud, and I'm trying to use it, there's a lot of these kinds of software where if it's extremely sensitive, especially if it's using money, if I'm opening it up to startups, I want to make sure that they're good. So there's different approaches. Either it can be super validated, I can have my engineers doing it all day long, I can review all the apps, but in these especially money-related circumstances, as we're seeing even in this blockchain community, it's very hard to predict all the bugs, to review them really quickly. And traditionally in cryptography, what we've seen is open sourcing data, the code, and getting feedback is the best way. So what I'm getting at is basically even Google and Amazon, if they ran a blockchain and let people run code on it, it becomes very interesting because 100% that this is the code that will be run and I can see it in plain sight. And so I will always know that, hey, tomorrow this startup can't just switch in this code and take my credit card data and do something else with it.
That also boils down to trust eventually? That you think
but
that
that is
code?
a trust where eventually Google and Apple can't.
Like for example, I know the fact that Bitcoin or Ethereum are fully open source, so you can actually figure out exactly what is happening and that gives a lot of people a lot of comfort. They can also see through as to what's happening or not happening. And because it's a distributed system, also very difficult to replicate and make copies and make dubious copies of any piece of code. Fair point. Ultimately comes to trust.
I want to add to this. Yeah. So first of all, I think all of us are on board with your criticism of blockchain. And well,
I'm not criticizing.
I think
I am a newbie, possibly. Many people in the room may be.
No, I just wanted to say two things. One is that I think this is awesome because right now there's a lot of blind optimism, and what you're encouraging us to do is to be very grounded in what does it boil down to? Is it trust? And I think trust is a really big part of it. I wanted to add one dimension, which is a very human dimension to this, which is political feasibility, right? So we discussed that there could be alternatives to blockchain systems that can exist on centralized databases. They exist today. If we're trying to have like a decentralized center, if we're trying to have, whether it's credit histories or whether it's information about people's skills, or in Proffer's case, it's human expertise, the political feasibility of allowing one entity to store that in their central database and to get trust from all stakeholders is very challenging, just because of the human aspect there, and because you will always have chances for backroom dealings where that one entity can accept a bribe or something else to modify a record. So it makes trust, it erodes trust.
Understand
so,
that. Yeah. So the question I want to ask then is, okay, you establish a system which has a new rules and new setup of doing certain transactions, whether that's skill or identity or certificates or money or whatever else. You establish some rules. Now, there is a quote-unquote political side of it where you will have to go and convince a large number of people to accept your rules as compared to my rules, right? I may have a slightly different version of my rules, and I may be more influential to get them accepted. So even in the blockchain environment, there is some degree of consensus building, right? And if you're talking about billions of nodes, you're talking about billions of dollars or billions of dollars being spent to build that consensus and establish that network.
I love it. And I think my response to that would be, if you put yourself in the shoes of one of these stakeholders that has to make a decision of should I join this network or not, you have to think about incentives. And there are very strong network effect incentives. So blockchain is, I think trust is a big piece of it. Network effects are another piece. And so if MIT and others, this is not an MIT system, for example. If it's as Sinchan said, a smart contract code is open. You can view it on Etherscan or whatever it is. In the case of Ethereum, what would make you want to do it is the network effects. Now, bootstrapping a network is an entirely different challenge, which is for the first 2 or 3 people in a network, how do you do it so that the others come on board? And that is exactly the goal of protocols today. And if you think about this ICO market, like maybe a lot of people in this room were excited about the opportunity to make a quick buck from the ICO market. But I think if you look at ICOs and you look at what are they really trying to do, it's very much building in this network effect concept. Like the first or second or third person are the ones that might need that extra incentive. And if you can incentivize them with demand-based appreciation, not speculative-based appreciation, which is our world today, then you can begin to solve these problems. So I want to introduce one other lens, which is that crypto economics lens that also comes very closely attached with our discussion of blockchain architecture.
Okay.
There's a crypto fuel. No, this is it. So like the token economy, what it does is, if you look at Ethereum, it's Ether. And if you look at other blockchains like Ethereum Web Foundation that Garrett was discussing, have their own tokens to incentivize people to participate. So the lens I want to add is, when you discuss blockchains, you also have to keep in mind that you have the ability to build on top of that, the ability to create and manage incentives, financial, reputational, whatever it might be, through tokens. And this is a way you can resolve some of these issues. So if we believe trust and network effects are 2 of the killer features that might make people adopt it, these are so blockchain with its token economy.
But whenever I'm starting something new, if it is a completely new concept, the network doesn't exist, and therefore I'm like yet another idea which doesn't get funded, right? And I'm talking about things which will take a lot of effort to build a business around it and raise the money. I'm using metaphor here. That is somewhat political in nature. You need to be an IIT and to get funding, right? Most people think so. and it definitely becomes, it is not as democratic as it could be, right? I'm not sure.
No,
Am
no,
I-
no.
did I
I
understand
completely
correctly?
agree. You're getting at a more human point.
It is
which-
human.
It is.
Ultimately,
Yeah.
we're talking
Yeah,
about
yeah, yeah. And,
business applications, social good.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I would.
politics.
I mean, so I'll just want to add in here. So definitely, it's I mean, blockchain and all these discussions. This is something that would impact the society as a whole.
Yes.
So it will include human psychology. It would economics. It would include all other governments and all those things. So just coming to that question, Arpit, about that, is trust the major thing out there? See, there are current ways in which decentralized processes take place, right, and they are beneficial for the entire ecosystem so that the movement takes place faster. What blockchain adds into this is that in a decentralized system, the problem is of trust. And that is, so if you ask me that if somebody prepares a central database of, let's say, profiles, I think the problem is still lesser. People do still trust government with their data. People do trust Google with their data. But when it comes that if I give you some money and let's say I trust Amit that he will make sure that I did this transaction, that is something that people are dubious about. That is something blockchain comes and ensures that if you are still working in a decentralized manner, you can still work with trust.
Excellent. So now what I hear you saying is that if there is a decentralized application, blockchain allows you to build trust in that setup.
Yes, yes.
Right? Which can allow a lot of interesting things to happen,
Exactly.
which may not happen in a centralized environment.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love this discussion. It's very interesting, yeah, because I think a lot of you guys are actually going to run into this as you design these protocols, because it does actually come into the human element often, where it's not just, hey, why am I even motivated to use this, but also attack vectors. You're going to have like evil people, nice people, random people who don't know what's going on. So a lot of these different aspects come into play, and it's very important to think about at every stage.
I think as a business, while everybody is trying to code, right, a certain application or blockchain, it's very important to understand the business and the human side of things, because when you are going to anybody, right, you need to sell. And when you're selling to a human, right, these are the kind of questions and actually I love when he was asking this question, because this is a discussion which we have always, right? Not only blockchain, right, but we know each other for a good amount of time. So whenever there is a new concept, a new technology which comes in, we have the discussions. We question, is this something which is going forward, right? Especially when with Vaibhav we were discussing about the hyper-local logistics, right, which was very sexy and cool 2-3 years back. right. So we also need to understand and keep questioning ourselves, especially because these are the questions which people will ask. And if you're not prepared, that means that you are not sure of what you have built, right? Which means you will not be able to do that sale or that transaction with whoever, especially the government.
Definitely. Yeah. No, I completely agree. It's a very interesting challenge, and especially one came to mind specifically for Aadhaar, actually. I don't know, this might be one of the few use cases where it is practical now, and a good change up where e-signing, and this is something we've mentioned in the past, where basically right now the way e-signing would work is like you'll e-sign with Aadhaar and then you'll get some certificate authority to give you a key or something of that sort. But I don't know, we've seen a lot of things that show us that these central certificate authorities just shouldn't be trusted for a lot of reasons.
Yes.
And so this would be an implementation where not only would it increase security, but it would also be easier in a lot of ways. You don't have to go back and forth with this authority, all of this stuff. So, no, that's one light of hope. But it's interesting. Yeah, I think now we're going to open up questions. Go ahead. Yeah, I think now we're going to.
So your question is, will we ever see things in light which make sense apart from just keeping the records in place? Vaibhav? I'm guessing yes. The panel would say yes.
I mean,
We wouldn't
the
be
answer
discussing
would
this.
depend on the use cases. The most so government, from a perspective of government is looking for the land registry process to come on blockchain. I mean, it's a long shot. I mean, I'm not saying that it's a easy enough task to do it, but it's a use case which is a defined use case for blockchain. At the same time, if implemented properly, it will actually solve huge problems that we have in our society or in our economy out there. So people will be incentivized in this way that if it exists a solution which can actually solve it, then they'll be motivated to learn about it and contribute about it. So I would take the same example of, let's say, Bitcoin. So the initial people who knew about Bitcoin, they entered into Bitcoin. Now it is more like people are seeing that there are so much return that one can get, and that is what is motivating people to enter into Bitcoin, right? Nobody taught them, and I know a lot of people who have just been taught by word of mouth. Okay, you just invest this much money, you will get this much money. Take care. They just see it to be just like more of a mutual fund of sorts, right? So it all depends on the use case. If that use case is good enough to motivate people, we will definitely see blockchain to be a reality in the Indian domain. Land is a major problem. I mean, there are so many court cases that are running on just for land records.
I can probably give you some sense. So government does this a lot of these initiatives, right, where they Jan Dhan, where they distribute a lot of money to people rural in villages, right, and we have other things which are run by governments. So the incentivization. So for example, there is a huge program with the government which is Digital India, right, where there are service providers in between who are supposed to train or digitally literate a lot of people. Now the challenge is they have no clue whatsoever who is being digitally literate or not, right? They can just spoof the numbers and not. Using these technologies, possibly there is a way where we can do all these things can be controlled. But having said that, I think the original question for you, I think until and unless we as business and developers don't mess it up, right? I think we have a lot of hope around blockchain and not only government but everybody around the world and in the rural places accepting this as part of their life in the next, not probably 5 years, but at least in the next decade or so.
See, I'd like to just add one simple thing. The basic premise of having any government, for that matter, the government inside this campus is the director and his people, right? Government in India is a central government and state governments and local governments. That they have been elected, the system basically is making sure that they have the trust of people, right? So if government is coming and saying that there is a possibility I'll build a system or I will sanction a system which assumes that governments cannot be trusted, it is an antithesis to their core existence. It is not going to happen any jiffy. However, we shouldn't even think about India. We should probably think about countries where it's very difficult for the government also to have a control. Like there are so many countries and pockets and tribes which don't have any system like that, and honestly the government have no trust of the people there. In those places you will see the emergence of blockchain based systems to be coming first, and then they will graduate towards there will be benefits of those systems, and they will eventually graduate towards more established countries, stable countries like India and America.
So just to quickly add on the second question that you had, that how will government incentivize such a thing?
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about maybe the rollout of UPI, I would say? I mean, I would say that's a good way in which they have opened up APIs. They have created that infrastructure, opened up APIs, that now even Google can come and create a UPI based solution. Uber can also use a UPI based solution. That is a good way in which private players can also come in and make benefits from the and I mean, if you trust that private players can actually incentivize it, I think the rollout of UPI is actually a good example of it.
So your understanding is bang on. The simple answer is it will take time, when we'll see a lot of these things happening. That the technology is capable, that is not a debate on this table. The only thing is, yes, as and when we'll see billions of dollars being invested and built and spent on everyday basis, it will take time to build.
Let's do one more question.
Yeah, one more.
Questions?
There you go.
Do you guys want to?
I haven't seen, I've looked at several healthcare startups in India. I haven't seen a practical use case of blockchain. The only close to imagination, close to reality use case could be an AHR oriented use case, but which is also record to large extent, right? And I don't know whether anything else is more responsible. So you can do EHR and you can do benefit transfer or identity, but those are relatively easy to understand. I haven't seen even those in India.
If we look at the global landscape, there's a very interesting piece of research on and pilot implementation for an EHR system that stores permissions for who has read permissions and write permissions to electronic health record data on the blockchain, stores the data off the blockchain. That's a scalable architecture, and this is called MEDREC. So if you're asking about a specific implementation, look up MEDREC. This is very early stages, and we are in the early stages of healthcare on the blockchain. I'll bring up a second piece we haven't talked about, which might also be a real application, but maybe not overnight. And that's on the side, if you think about AI for healthcare and training data for healthcare, we talk a lot about data privacy, and you want to build models using patient healthcare data so that it gets better over time, but you have to protect patient privacy. And so there's this big debate that in order to build the best model, hey, if you're a Google, yeah, you can go partner with a national health service or something like that and get that data. But if you're not, how do you do it? And so the blockchain world, and again, the mathematicians and the cryptographers out there have been thinking about, is there a way to use blockchain, both the cryptography behind it as well as the incentive system behind it, to be able to make a difference here when it comes to training AI models to predict diseases or things on patient data without revealing patient data. And I'll give one concrete example. We don't have to go into this, but if you look up in your own time homomorphic encryption, the idea of that is that if you have a model, you can either I'll give two examples. One is you can encrypt a model and have the clients have an encrypted version of the model and still train on the encrypted model without knowing what the model intelligence is. So you can either protect the intelligence of the model itself, and the opposite, where you have a model that is running on encrypted patient data so that the patient data is never revealed. This is a very nascent and interesting application, because if you can figure it out, and the reason you need blockchain here is for the crypto economics layer and the incentives layer, that could be an exciting space. It's a very unconventional one. Like, it's not directly, hey, let's verify health records on the blockchain. It's let's improve our ability to build better AI without encroaching on people's privacy, which is still a very important piece of healthcare.
Yeah, I think those are.
I'm a novice in blockchain, hence I wanted to just test one of the hypotheses with you to say whether I'm thinking in the right direction or not. So what I understand of this is still there's electronic health records, patient digitization, all of this exists. There are simpler ways of doing this, and a lot of people are doing it, including Practo, Banerjee, everybody. What I'm saying is there's a big concern in the doctor community today that you might be revealing my information or my patient information in the outside world. So what blockchain is doing in that sense, when you spoke about EHR, is probably that, yes, I have an hypothesis as a company that this data is encrypted, and I've encrypted that data, but now there's an authentication coming in from a blockchain code that yes, that encryption is actually verified, and here's the proof of that encryption. Is that what blockchain is doing?
This is only a part of what you're talking about. What you're saying is that there is something called as smart contracts and smart tokens. You're saying that I will define the rules by which it can be accessed, read, written, copied, etc., etc. Those rules, and by the way, this is independent of healthcare or not, are set in the blockchain. Allows you to set those rules, and if large number of people are agreeable to those rules, that rules can be called by your name. And if everyone is acceptable to those rules, then the data transfer, interchange of data can happen smoothly. The corollary to that is, if the guy next to you also decides his own rules who are slightly different, then a lot more people will have to agree to that. If more people agree to that rule, then you are at a conflict situation, because people will have to access this rule or that rule, and data will again become in silos. So the smart contracts allow you to do this in multiple ways. You can set up those rules, and a blockchain allows you to execute this in an automated fashion. Yes, so you're right. However, it is not about privacy or not. It is about the rules. It allows you to create a system which has certain rules. The system has to be accepted by a large number of people for it to become popular and the default
The
standard.
leading block.
I think actually like explaining blockchain is one of those things which is rather tricky, and I think there's a lot of resources online that will get you a very good primer on how they work, especially because there's a few different types, and every single one will have different use cases specifically for healthcare. So there's also pharmaceutical drug tracking, so like who produced this drug, where it went through. Canada just started a trial, or they're looking at it for legalizing marijuana and trying to make sure that marijuana is only coming from assured sources. And so there's a lot of these things going on, and I'd recommend.
I think that's something which I wanted to kind of touch.
Yeah.
How many of you are trying to do great IoT, play a role in IoT and blockchain? Okay.
Oh,
Okay. One.
there you go. Yeah. Two. Nice.
Right. So one of the things which, especially when it comes to pharma or medicine, right, there's a lot of counterfeiting happens across the globe, but a lot of it happens in India, right? We have. So can we probably look at using blockchain as one of the technologies where you can stop this? Second is a lot of medicines needs a certain temperature, right? So where IoT can be interesting, where when the logistics is happening, right, I can ensure then the temperature is not dipping or going up, and when it reaches the patients, right? Let's say in the rural areas, can we track if it's the injection is something which I should use or not, right? Because if the temperature is dipped in between, the entire medicine has lost the value, and if it's been injected, the patient can die. Right, so these are some of the interesting other use cases in the medicine healthcare space, which I think we should look at. Sure.
Yeah. No.
Who else?
And we should just take one more question, and I think we'll have to wrap it up in the interest of time after that.
We have put money into companies which are into Bitcoin buying and selling without any regulatory clarity. Yes, so yes, people will put money.
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting parts about this market, especially with ICOs happening. There's money believing in the future. A lot of countries are confused about what kind of regulations they should put out. Vietnam is one of them. Japan is considering its own. China keeps going back and forth. So there's a lot of interesting stuff happening, and I think as time goes by, India and other countries will assure that they have the right regulation, and a lot of these startups will get more clarity as to what's going to work and what's not. But that's why right now ICOs are fueling innovation, and such are these hackathons. So I think with that, thank you guys. Amazing conversations, and yeah, let's give them a round of applause. And yeah, let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you.